Jason. Friday the 13th is one of my favorite horror movie franchises ever. Now, I don't necessarily like it for its interesting characters or interesting social commentary, because quite frankly, it has none of that. What I really like is the kills and the vibe. The kills, on one hand, are the reason you're watching the movie. Because these movies really are not scary whatsoever. There's not a scary moment in any of them.
Welcome to New York.
But the kills are most of the payoff for every scene in all of these movies. There's usually one person left, usually a woman, who ends up surviving, not necessarily killing Jason in every instance, but surviving. And that's literally the plot of every single movie. And the aesthetics really carry these movies mostly, because there is no plot. So how is the location? How is the look of the movie? Today, I will be taking all of those things into account and tier listing the Friday the 13th franchise. Let's just go in chronological order. Let's start with the very first one, Friday the 13th. The movie's vibe is maybe the most authentic in the whole series. The characters in the movie are mostly not interesting, but they act like actual jackasses for the most part. I don't really think any of them are that likable. What I do like about Friday the 13th is the third act.
Killer, Mommy. Killer.
I think if you're going into the Friday the 13th series and you start with this one, the third act might kind of take you by surprise if you don't know anything about the movie. I think Pamela Voorhees is a really interesting villain. Her performance is like incredible. It's like a big reason why this movie is at least decent, because those first two acts are so boring. You do have some interesting kills kind of scattered through here. There's not much else that like keeps the movie together, and it's very incoherent. There are like really tiny things I like about those first two acts. Specifically in the first act, I do like how it is set up that this character, who I cannot remember the name of, is set up to be sort of our main character, but then she gets killed in the woods. But once we focus on our actual main group character, there's not much else going on. I also have to docket some points for killing a real snake.
Kill it.
You heard the lady.
I can't get it till it comes out.
Well, call him.
One of the characters like chops its head off with a machete, and it's real, and I don't really know what the point of that scene was. Genuinely, I think where it's at is perfect. B tier. It's like the most middle of the road. And then we have Friday the 13th Part 2, which is one of my favorites in the franchise. I'll say that right now. I think this movie is basically like a better version of the first movie. In my opinion, the characters are more interesting, more resilient, and more iconic as well. It has one of my favorite kills in the whole franchise because of just how it escalates and the sheer over-the-topness of it. Like, that is actually crazy. Like, someone thought to do that and put it on celluloid film, and there was a period of time where this was, like, popular. Like, that is crazy. While the kill is, like, pretty funny, it is also, like, really well done, and it is kind of a little frightening. This is really, like, the first movie we see Jason killing people. He doesn't have the hockey mask yet, but he is wearing a sack over his head, and I do personally like that look. It has the most like camp essence out of all of the movies, in my opinion. If I'm being honest, I mean, it's probably the best final act in all of the movies. We see Ginny, who is probably the best main character in all of the movies. She ends up going toe to toe with Jason for that entire third act, and it is like the most resilient moment in just all of the movies. I don't know if part 2 is like underrated. I don't know what other people really think about part 2, but it's gonna be going in the top of A tier for me. Next up, we have Friday the 13th, part 3 in 3D. I used to really, really like part 3, especially because of that 3D aspect. There is like an immense amount of shots in this movie where they are fully utilizing like the 3D. Ones that come to my mind are the snake and the yo-yo and the apples and of course the eyeball. The thing that makes this movie not as great, in my opinion, is Shelley.
Damn it, Shelley! Why do you do these stupid things?
Shelley, I don't know what they were thinking, but there's like a fine line between like insufferable characters that are like fun to watch and insufferable characters that are insufferable. Shelley's definitely, he's the most insufferable of insufferables. Not only that, not a really good or interesting cast of characters. I mostly remember like just some kills from this movie, like the eyeball, like I mentioned. I think one of my favorite kills in the whole franchise is in this. God damn it! But it's the kill where the guy is doing the handstand.
Andy! Yeah? Are you still out there? I can't hear you.
It's like a kill that looks like very real, and it looks like it hurt. It's a lot of things. The camera being under the floor, and then the way that Jason like hid his body, like he just shoves it in the ceiling. Like why would he do that? I would say the rest of this movie is kind of every time I rewatch it, it just gets kind of just more dull and not as interesting. I have seen it in 3D though, and the 3D, it actually kind of makes the movie worse. It's almost funnier to watch it in 2D and just like appreciate the shot of like the yo-yo coming in your face. I can't believe I just said that. I'm gonna throw this in C tier. Next up, we have Friday. My fucking God, Friday the 13th. Part 4, the final chapter. This is a lot of people's favorites, and for a good reason. One, the kills are so good. They brought back Tom Savini, who worked on the first movie, and his effects in that first movie are good, but there's so much more potential, and he delivers that potential in this movie. I'm talking about the corkscrew scene.
Ted! Hey, Ted, where the hell's the corkscrew?
To me, it's not even like the gore in that scene, it's like the performance and the editing. So good. It is so good. And honestly, the editing in this movie in particular of the kills is top notch. Like the cutaways are really impactful. It's almost like less is more, and they did a perfect job of like working around the MPAA and making each kill still super brutal. Tom Savini's best work probably comes in the final act, where we see Jason without his mask on, and Tommy Jarvis swings a machete to the side of his head, and he just slides down it. It's like really, really gross, but it's also so cool. And not to mention the humor within this movie, it has probably like the more interesting characters, mostly because they're caricatures of characters that would be in a movie like this. I wouldn't say that the level of writing is as postmodern as something like Scream, but the characters are definitely just like written to be the most horny and basically stupid characters in the franchise.
God, I'm horny.
It makes it work because of the Jarvises as well, because those are characters that we actually like, specifically Tommy Jarvis, who's a kid, and it's so refreshing to get that dynamic where it's these really horny teenagers, but through the perspective of Tommy Jarvis and the family. It's very refreshing to not have a final girl really in this movie. There is someone that is set up to be the final girl, but then she dies very suddenly. Then the rest of the movie kind of takes place, and it's mostly Tommy Jarvis devising a plan to actually defeat Jason. So far in the franchise, nothing like that has ever really been done, And the finality of this movie, it being called the final chapter, if it really were the final chapter, would make it a lot better. But in a way, it still is the final chapter. I mean, it's the final chapter of Jason being a human being, and it's sort of the final chapter of like a more innocent era of the Friday the 13th franchise, where it's not as scuzzy and manipulated as other movies in the franchise become. These first 4 movies represent such an interesting era in both like horror and Friday the 13th, and this movie is really like the end of an era, 1980 through 1984. I know it's very obvious, but I think I'm going to put it in the S tier. It's the best one for a reason. Okay, we have Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. This is a fall from grace. I want to just defend it real quick. It's probably the most exploitative and like filthy Friday the 13th movie. It definitely has like the most nudity and just like disgusting characters maybe in all of the movies, but it goes to such a degree to where it feels like a John Waters movie. And there's like just like some of the most like coked out 80s moments I've ever seen on film.
This ain't starting, man. Fucked up again, it ain't starting. I'm gonna kick your ass, kick your ass. Come on now. Come on, everybody, this ain't starting. Come on, motherfucker. Fix the fucking car. Come on. Fucked up again, you asshole.
The director famously used to direct pornography, and it really shows because the production of this movie, it feels like you're watching something like that. So the vibe is really off. The vibe is off the charts. The kills, there are some interesting kills. There's always interesting kills in a Friday the 13th franchise. I think the only one that like really impacts me is the belt kill. It's sometimes like the smallest things that end up being the most interesting kind of kill, but the plot of this one is basically Jason's not actually back. It's someone pretending to be Jason because his son was killed by some random guy at this like mental institution. It's so like far-fetched, like the ending of this movie. It's unbelievable. I don't even hate that like Jason's not Jason in this movie. Like I don't really care that much. I know people do, but like Jason is just like a dude in a mask. Like he has no character. The fact that it's some guy named Roy really doesn't affect the movie that much for me. Genuinely, the more interesting scenes in this movie are scenes that don't involve kills or Jason. And I don't know if that's like a good thing or a bad thing. Like, I'm immediately thinking of any scene with Tommy Jarvis doing kung fu on someone.
Relax, Chief. What's wrong? No sense of humor?
Or Demon and Reggie the Reckless. It feels really out of place. It's kind of refreshing, though. This is a very refreshing kind of movie. This is like the Survivor Gabon of Friday the 13th movies, in my opinion. And that analogy is only going to make sense to like 3 people, but I'm going to put it in A tier. Next up, we have Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, is in the title. Jason is back. This movie is extremely cinematic. It feels like a real movie. It's also pretty funny. The opening of this movie is Tommy Jarvis going back to kill Jason once and for all. Don't really know what that means.
Jason belongs in hell, and I'm gonna see he gets there.
But apparently they have to go make sure he's dead. He comes back as like a Frankenstein type zombie thing. It's the same thing again, but Jason is a zombie. It kind of gets rid of a lot of tropes like excessive nudity and dumb characters, and instead replaces them with pretty interesting characters, a more genuine romance, and get this, actual children at summer camp.
So, what were you gonna be when you grew up?
There is no other Friday the 13th movie that has this besides this one. I actually understand why they wouldn't beforehand, because these movies are typically very violent, very exploitative. It'd be kind of weird to have children within the frame of that. But this movie, for the most part, is it's gory, but it's not nearly as like violent as other Friday the 13th movies. I think the director, knowing that he did not have Tom Savini, realized that he needed to make more of like an interesting plot, and He surely did. I will say Jason in this movie, he's like a superhero. By this point, it's like it doesn't really surprise you, but when you think about it, it's kind of crazy that they had this guy doing this. But yeah, I'm quite fond of this movie. I really like Tommy Jarvis in this movie. I think that it's cool to have a recurring character across 3 movies in the middle of a franchise, played by 3 different actors as well. But yeah, very entertaining movie. I think I'm gonna just throw it in the A tier. Next up, we have Friday the 13th, Part 7. The New Blood. Arguably the most screwed over movie in the franchise because it was cut down so heavily by the MPAA, and most of the kills that we would have gotten ended up being cut down so significantly that they're not memorable or interesting at all. I literally can't think of a single one. I will say the sleeping bag kill, pretty good. It's pretty good. In terms of the vibe, well, I can't help but say that it's kind of bland. The characters are really stereotypical, somewhat uninspired, and I know they kind of try to twist some of those stereotypes and flip them on its head. It doesn't work for me for the most part. I think it's really cool that our main character has telekinetic powers. I guess the only time we really see that is in the very fantastic third act. But other than that, like, she has a lot of trauma about accidentally killing her dad. It has a weird payoff at the end where the dad like comes back to life and like takes Jason and it's just like it's so corny. But as I was saying, the third act of this movie is really the most memorable part, where Tina and Jason go head to head in this battle of telekinesis and strength, and it's pretty fun to watch because there's a lot of stunt work, and Jason falls down, he gets lit on fire, his mask gets ripped off, and you get to see how just amazing his design looks in this movie. This is the first movie with Kane Hodder behind the mask of Jason, and arguably it's his best performance as Jason. It doesn't really make much sense to me that Jason is a zombie and was rotting at the bottom of a lake and he somehow got more buff, but I'll accept it because this is unserious. I'm going to leave Part 7 in the B tier. Next up, we have Friday the 13th, Jason Takes Manhattan. Yes, if you've seen this movie, you know that this title is a lie. Jason is only in Manhattan for the last maybe 20 minutes of the movie. That's the main gripe people have with this movie, is that it feels like cheap marketing, mostly because they aren't in Manhattan for the most of the movie, they're on a boat. But it's also kind of like one of the lazier productions, I would say. Jason looks really cool in this movie, I will say. And then he takes his mask off and you're like, dear God, it just looks like they like chewed up bubblegum and just like put fake teeth on it. By golly, being on that boat feels so long. It feels so long. When you first watch Part 8, you really expect to be in Manhattan at a certain point, but it's just like more and more scenes of the boat, and it goes on forever. I will say the movie is better on rewatch, considering you kind of know what to expect. You know that most of the movie's on a boat. You can almost just like change the title in your mind and be like, Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason goes on a boat for an hour and then goes to Manhattan for 12 minutes. Those last minutes in Manhattan are awesome, though. It doesn't really quite fully commit, though, and I really wish it did. I really think this could have been like one of the best ones if they just had filmed more scenes in Manhattan. Just a change of scenery is all we needed, and they couldn't even like commit to it. Jason Goes to Hell. I hate to be the one to say it, but I kind of fucking dig this movie.
I'll take a Voorhees burger and a side of Jason fingers.
We already know that if Jason's not in it, I don't really care that much. He's literally in it in the first 4 minutes and the last, 2 minutes. Everything else is Jason's little demon slug climbs into random people's bodies, and there's a little bit of an aspect of a invasion of the body snatchers type thing where it's just regular people, but they have the strength and mind of Jason. But I think just like Part 5, this one has an attitude about it that feels kind of filthy. I find the characters and the writing to be okay. I think it's serviceable. I don't think like it's not like Friday the 13th Part 1 or 4. It kind of feels like there's no main character and that it's just like you're watching an ensemble of people. This movie definitely has a main character and he's pretty interesting. He's fun to watch, but like sometimes in the movie there is just like no agency and there is like really just nothing going on that is super interesting. There's this one guy, I think his name's Creighton Duke.
Creighton Duke. I'm gonna kill Jason Voorhees.
And he shows up and he's like, oh, I've been hunting Jason for my whole life. This movie's really campy and just like silly. I think it's a little overhated. I don't think it's as bad as people say it is. Definitely considering the standards of Friday the 13th, this is, I would say, not that bad. Just based on what I think I'm going to put it in the A tier. Oh my god, everyone's favorite, Jason X. Now, I think I hate this movie. I really do. I think this is like one of my least favorite horror movies.
Guys! It's okay, he just wanted his machete back!
I get that there's like a certain appeal to it where it's like so bad it's good, but I think it's just bad. I think it's like just really lame. I could see like arguments for part 5 and part 9, but I think what separates Jason X from those is that Jason X doesn't really have an amount of charm to it. It feels very like overproduced. I don't think Jason in Space is like a necessarily bad idea. I think they could pull it off, and I think the series has gotten to a point where it's like so ridiculous, like why not? But just like the production design is so uninspired, and just every set looks fake as fuck. I mean, you really want him to kill the people in this movie now because most of the people suck. But I mean, I'm just gonna show this clip, and then I'm gonna move on.
It's beautiful.
All right, we have Freddy vs. Jason. It's really hard to talk about this as like a Jason movie. I will say I probably have seen this one more than the rest of the Jason movies because I watched it a lot as a kid. There's like a special place in my heart for Freddy vs. Jason, and I think for horror fans, I think it is like a really unique kind of movie. I mean, how often does a movie like this get made and have enough hype for it to get made? I have a couple of gripes with it, mostly with the practical and visual effects. Some of the humor as well is more dated than the humor in like the 80s movies, and it's a shame that Jason was not played by Kane Hodder. I'm not quite sure why they didn't hire him again, because I think he's amazing, and it would have been even more significant to have like Robert Englund, who's very much known as Freddy, with Kane Hodder, who's very much known as Jason. But I think what makes this movie just so purely exciting is this combination of the plots. Could this movie be better? Absolutely. Am I going to take it for what it is? Absolutely. I think I'm going to leave it in the B tier. All right, and then we have the Friday the 13th remake, made by Platinum Dunes, which is Michael Bay's production company. This is a very unique kind of Friday the 13th movie. It's a very like serious kind of movie, and it delves a lot more into like Hicksploitation. And I'm not like a huge fan of Hicksploitation, but they definitely make Jason to be out more of like a hillbilly. It's okay in terms of like a remake. It's okay in terms of a Friday the 13th movie. It doesn't really feel like a Friday the 13th movie, but expectations were low going into it, and they kind of exceeded them, just slightly though.
That is a fierce pussy.
It's actually Bobcat. It's my dad's first kill.
But I don't think I can put it above any of the originals, just purely based on the fact that the originals, the first 8 movies, are all just so like rich with charm and atmosphere. I'm going to put it right there in C tier. And there we have it. That is the completed tier list. But you guys let me know what you think of this tier list, what your rankings would be, if you disagree, if you agree. Am I being a little too hard on Jason X? Let me know in the comments. I would be sure to read and reply to all of them. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out.